Drumpftland, or formerly known as. Chapter 2 continued. Blake can see Bronson's life clearly. Bronson will marry and divorce a few times and squeak by and be well liked because he's naturally friendly and outgoing, and people mistake his stupidity for humor. Bryant, I feel my eyes well up with tears. Bryant is having a hard life. He's a square peg and his family is a round hole, pounding him with a hammer, trying to make him fit. They want him to be like Blake and Bronson, friendly, outgoing, athletic, able to give inspiring speeches and toast. Instead, he's dyslexic and thoughtful, but people mistake his thoughtfulness, his taking his time to consider his answer, as slow witted and dumb. If it involves reading and writing, because of his dyslexia, he struggles terribly with it. He's mechanically inclined. That's where his strength is. But they are trying to make him a cross, make him fit into that round hole no matter what it takes. His parents don't understand him and are frustrated with him. They just don't get that he's never going to be a cross the way they believe he should be. They can't accept his natural inclination is to be Joe the mechanic, and there's nothing wrong with being Joe the mechanic. His brothers often tease him mercilessly, and I think he finally cracked under the pressure. You know his family well, states Reynolds with sharp eyes. I nod agreeingly, but they don't know me half as well as I know them, and they don't really know my family at all. They have us sit with them at church on Sunday, but they've never had us all over for dinner, nor accepted having dinner with us. They just know the basics, that we're all good, hardworking people. Reynolds' request, tell me about the incident at church last Sunday. I respond, I know these people. I know they like to gossip. You can't tell me a couple dozen people haven't told you a couple dozen versions already. True, he confirms with a nod, but I want to hear it from you. I breathe in through my nose. When Pastor Cross asked Dr. Walker to stand so everyone could get a look at him and meet our new doctor, I naturally looked over at him too. Dr. Walker smiled at me, and I automatically smiled back. Bryant just snapped. He hopped up and smacked me full force and ordered me not to smile at Dr. Walker. He was always a little possessive and insecure, but since I finished my degree and began working, he's been very, very insecure and needy. Was he physically abusive before that? Inquires Reynolds. I shake my head. No, he wasn't. Before I started working, he was a little possessive, but I was still looking forward to being his wife. But you don't look forward to it now, Reynolds stating more than asking. But I confirm no, I'm afraid he's begun a habit he can't break, that I'm just going to go from being a battered fiance to being a battered wife. Why do you think he's so insecure? Asked Reynolds. I share. He's acutely aware there are a number of men in our district that, while saying one thing out in public, in front of the women and at church, privately feel very different. Things have been whispered to me and to him. He's worried that I'll be raped and murdered like my grandmother was, and it frustrates him that I don't listen to him and won't quit my job like he wants me to. I love my job. I don't want to lose my job. What kind of things have been said to you and him? Asked Reynolds. I asked because I'd rather not repeat any of that filth. You really don't want to hear any of that sick crap, do you? He responds with a firm nod. I asked. All right. I agreed, but not happily so. To me, bet you're a sweet little fuck. I'd like to fuck your tight little hole, bloody. I bet that fine ass of yours sure gives a good bounce when your asshole's being fucked. To him, I once overheard, you don't fuck no one but her. Her hole must be incredibly tight. And I hope you've heard enough, because I think if I tell you one more, my father will faint. Reynolds puts his hand up in surrender. That's fine. So did the rest of church Sunday go well? I shrug. It was typical for what it's been like the last couple of years. Brian made it known he wasn't happy about Dr. Walker joining our household, and I think Brian only dropped one F-bomb that morning. That's very good for him. Peggy Sue nearly got smacked in the mouth by Brian for hissing at me, but nothing too out of the ordinary happened. And I rode home with Bryant and his family, and Bryant was supposed to have me home in time for dinner. Anything out of the ordinary happened before the altercation between you and Bryant Cross? Asked Reynolds. Not that I recall, with a shrug. As I was helping Mrs. Cross with lunch, his brothers teased him. Mrs. Cross noted our family was overdue for getting to know each other. They asked me some questions about myself and my family they hadn't asked before. Brian asked me if I had prior knowledge of Dr. Walker joining our household, but I didn't. There was some kind of argument or disagreement. I can't tell the man everything. I mean, I could, and I probably should. Damn, my head hurts. But Daddy helps me out unintentionally with, don't push it. You've got two different knots on your head. If you don't remember everything, that's okay. It may come back to you later. I just remember Mrs. Cross was so upset she started drinking wine straight from the bottle, and Bryant was so upset he didn't want to eat lunch with his family. So I made a tray to take up to his room. Blake and Bronson made it into the room before Bryant could shut and lock the door. What did they want? Asked Reynolds. Besides me, I respond. Blake wanted to talk to Bryant. About what? Asked Reynolds. Me, I answered. Then I explained. Blake told Bryant that he believes my family is so fed up with Bryant that he thinks they've begun looking for someone to marry me to out from under Bryant. Did that upset Bryant? Asked Reynolds. I nod. He gave me a panicked shake. That's how I got the fingertip bruises on my arms. But all I could tell Bryant was they haven't discussed such a thing with me. But Blake has a plan. Reynolds asked, what's Blake's plan? I inform him for Bryant to step aside so he can marry me, and he promised to continue to share me with Bryant even after I'm his wife. So Bryant's been sharing you with his brother, states Reynolds. I tell him he really didn't get much of a choice in the matter. Bryant is older than me by a couple of months, but I went through puberty before him, and Bryant didn't go through puberty for another 2 years. But Blake managed to trick me into playing find the pussy in the dark. He led me to believe he had a kitten hidden in a large walk-in closet, and I was still a gullible kid. After I went in to look for it, he shut the door behind himself, trapping me in the dark closet with him. By the time Bryant went through puberty, Blake had been having sex with me for 2 years. Bryant was so upset when he found out, but Blake manipulated him into sharing me. When Bronson found out, he didn't want to get left out. Bronson's opportunistic when it comes to getting laid, and he gets laid every chance he can get. With a maid at home, a woman or girl at church, he does it every chance he gets with anyone who's willing. Blake was like that at first, too, diddling the maids and girls at school and church, too. But for around a decade now, Blake has only been having sex with me, and Bryant has only ever been with me. Is Blake in love with you too? Asked my mom. I shrug. He says he is, and if I look at his behavior, he seems to be telling the truth. And now he thinks Bryant is losing me. So he wants Bryant to step aside so he can marry me and they don't lose me. Blake's a clever devil, states my granddad. Scary clever, states my papa. How does Bryant feel about Blake's plan? Asked Reynolds. I shake my head. He doesn't like it, not one little bit. And since Blake's the one that's supposed to follow in their father's footsteps, Bryant doesn't think Mr. Cross will allow him to marry a non-white woman. But Bryant agreed to think about it. What else happened? Asked Reynolds. After Blake and Bronson satisfied themselves, they left the room. Bryant and I were finally alone. We were lying in bed talking. He asked me what I thought about Blake's plan, and I had to acknowledge that Blake is really good at reading people and that he's certainly right about my family not being happy with him. He then asked something about something I felt was a loaded question, something about him not giving me any choices. I acknowledged that I had never I acknowledged that he had never asked me to be his girlfriend and he had never proposed, but I admitted that if he had asked, I would have said yes. But I also admitted I would break up with him if I could over his losing his temper with me. But he wasn't mad. He acknowledged that I was stuck with him, and I told him I only felt stuck when he's mistreating me, and most of the time I'm happy with him. He said something about not being a good fiance and not being a good husband or father and failing to protect me. He finally compared me to a bird in a cage singing sweetly. I shake my head because it's fuzzy. He said something about setting me free and started choking me. He was crying as he said, I'm sorry, I don't know how else to set you free. I got my hand on a root beer bottle on the nightstand and hit him in the head with it. He grabbed his head in pain, and I tumbled off the bed, away from him, gasping for air. Then he was kicking me and yelling, let me set you free. Then he was sitting on me, choking me again. I wipe away some tears. I realized I still had the root beer bottle in my hand. I hadn't let go of it. And this time I hit him with everything I had. The bottle broke and he fell unconscious. I sob as I ask, is he all right? Nobody will talk to me about him. Reynolds informs me he's all right, but he's not really talking to anyone. He woke up Monday morning and he believes he killed you. All he said so far is I strangled my fiance, Dr. Ava Washington. I wish to be executed immediately. Is anyone going to tell him I'm alive? I ask. We'll tell him, assures Reynolds. We're just still piecing things together. Do you remember how you got out of the Cross house? I inform him. I pushed Bryant off of me. I checked his pulse. He was breathing and his pulse was strong and steady. I was partially twisted up in the flat sheet, so I held on to it. And I just wanted to go home. I started down the front steps. I tripped and fell down them. I may have laid unconscious at the bottom of the stairs for a few minutes. I just remember trying to focus on the front doors, and they were fuzzy, but I had to go home. So I pulled myself up, limped to the front doors, let myself out, and limped down the driveway. All I could think was I wanted to go home. I needed to go home. I held on to that damn sheet as I limped, and when I was about halfway home, I tripped again. I heard my father's voice. I heard my mother crying. There were bright lights hurting my eyes. I touched Dr. Walker's pretty hair, and then I woke up here around 4 a.m. in the morning. 4 a.m. this morning. Reynolds reminds me, you said you were limping after you fell down the stairs. Do you remember if you were limping before you fell down the stairs? I have to think about it for a minute. Slightly. I think that's why I fell down the stairs, but it was worse after I fell down the stairs. The sidewalk's uneven, states my dad in realization. What's that, Dr. Washington? Asked Detective Reynolds. My dad explains. Where I found her, the sidewalk is uneven. People trip there all the time. They usually catch themselves before they actually fall and just keep going. But she was injured and disoriented, so when she tripped there on the uneven sidewalk, she went down. Detective Reynolds nods his understanding. I think I have everything I need for now, but I may have more questions later. I asked Reynolds, so, how many steroids does it take to get that swollen? He looks down at himself and admits, okay, maybe I've overdone it a little, but it's supposed to make the bad guys think twice about trying to fight me. I tell him, I'm sure it works. He shakes his head with an amused grin. Have a good night, folks. And we call good night as he leaves. I've never been hospitalized before, saved the first few days of my life after I was born. And being a doctor who's accustomed to giving orders and directions, I'm a horrible patient who's not following her orders. I'm no fan of the bland hospital food, but luckily I have my beautiful abuela to bring me good food. I'm going to live, and my family knows that they can't all be in the room with me 24 hours, 7 days. 20, can't be in the room with me 24/7. Ha- have a, and have adjusted their schedules so they can take turns visiting me so that I'm never alone in my hospital room. And on my second conscious day in the hospital, I get visitors. I wasn't expecting visitors. After all, the only close friend I have outside my family is Brian, if you count him. But my first visitors are other currently hospitalized patients and patients in for treatments, bringing me their charts to check them over for them. Mr. Peters, something looks per- Mr. Peters, everything looks perfectly in order, I assure the elderly gentleman. I wouldn't do anything any different than Dr. Walker. I hand him his chart. Just relax and get some rest. He rolls his wheelchair out of my hospital room door, past Dr. Walker, who's smiling amused. Dr. Walker asks me, "How am I doing, doctor?" I tell him pleased, "Very well. So thus far, I'm very happy with your work, and I don't think I'm going to need to retrain you." Dr. Walker chuckles. I'm glad to hear that. "This is the room," says a man's voice. "Pastor Cross," I say, surprised, as he steps into my hospital room. "We heard you regained consciousness yesterday," shares Pastor Cross, as Pastor Wimbley rushes past him to me. Pastor Wimbley is in tears as he hugs me and covers my face in kisses. I wipe his tears from his wizened face as I tell him, "Don't cry, Wimbley. I'm going to make a full recovery. They may let me go home in another day or two." "I'll let you visit," Dr. Walker tells Pastor Cross before exiting the room. Pastor Wimbley kisses my fingers. "If only I were a younger man. I'm too old to make you a proper husband." "Oh, Wimbley," I tell him from my heart, "I think you would make any woman a fine husband." Pastor Wimbley lifts my chin to have a good look at my face. He doesn't look pleased. "List your injuries for me, please, Ava." "Two head contusions, stitches here, black eye, bruised ribs, one rib fractured on this side and two fractured on this side. My right foot is broken and my right ankle is strained. And I have quite a lot of bruises and a few places with stitches here and there." "The bruises on your neck?" asked Pastor Wimbley, concerned. I inform them. "He tried to strangle me." "Did you two have an argument?" asked Pastor Wimbley. I shake my head. "No, no argument, no disagreement. He just decided to set me free." "Set you free?" questions Pastor Cross in disbelief. I shrug. "That's what he kept saying. I think he had a psychotic break." Pastor Cross nods agreeingly. "He's been having a hard time for quite some time. You and your family have been amazingly tolerant." I tell Pastor Cross. "He's been unhappy for so long. I was hoping he'd pull through it, but he seems to have forgotten what it's like to be happy. Have they let you see him? I don't want him mistreated badly." "They haven't let anyone see him since they took him into custody," shares Pastor Cross. "But they're going to let family see him today. That includes me. When they found him, they thought you had both been attacked by intruders." Pastor Cross shakes his head sadly, "except when he regained consciousness Monday morning, he confessed to your murder and requested immediate execution. To my knowledge, he hasn't struggled or put up a fight of any kind, but he's not talking to anyone either. He just keeps requesting to be executed." Pastor Wimbley says to Pastor Cross, "Whatever's gone wrong inside his head, he still loves her and wants to be with her. He thinks she's dead, so he's asking to be executed so he can be with her." I squeeze Pastor Wimbley's hand. "I think you're right." Most young women would be turned off by Pastor Wimbley's wizened face, but I think he's adorably cute. I can see the devastatingly handsome young man he once was. Pastor Cross looks at the way we're holding hands with soft understanding in his eyes. Pastor Cross informs me there have been complaints that you've never been included in the rotation with other young women to provide service for clergy. But you've been servicing Pastor Wimbley, haven't you? I blush as I nod. I was a little uncomfortable with it at first. I knew Bryant wouldn't like it. He's been stuck sharing me with his older brother since I went through puberty. The last thing he would ever want is to share me with one more man. That's the biggest reason why he's been in such a hurry to marry me, so he can tell his brothers no because I'm his wife. But Wimbley's no chore. He often comforts me when I'm very upset. Pastor Cross tells Wimbley, and here we thought you weren't seeking service with the young women because you were no longer able to perform. I giggle. Wimbley's not having trouble performing. Pastor Wimbley adds, I just don't like any of those rude, mean, selfish bitches. Pastor Cross and I are both shocked silent for a moment. Then I state, amused, Wimbley, I can't believe you said that. Wimbley shrugs. They're lost and they don't want to be found. I I know the sermons and lessons are wasted on them. They want heaven to be an entitlement instead of something that's earned through good works. They're so willfully stupid they don't even realize I told them they're all going to hell last Sunday. You told them they're going to hell during your last lesson? Questions Pastor Cross, shocked. Not directly, I defend. Pastor Wimbley informs Pastor Cross. Ava answered a question of mine perfectly and got called a gold digging nigger whore. And that was followed by niggers don't go to heaven, not even if they're good ones. I explained that skin color has nothing to do with it, that it's how you live your life that determines if you're going to heaven or hell, not your skin. Then I got asked why God created them. He rolls his old gray eyes. They simply choose to ignore God's first people were people of color. And nowhere in the Bible does it say only white people go to heaven. They ignore that scientists discovered white people evolved from people of color. That pale skin is a genetic mutation. They insist on believing that being pigmentally challenged makes them superior. So I simply told them that their chosen mental illness in this area will keep them out of heaven. There are no exceptions from loving thy neighbor and loving thy enemy. I tell Pastor Cross. They think he's going senile, and it's just him going on in an old crazy person rant. They never listen to what he's saying. Pastor Cross takes a deep breath and sighs sadly with a heavy heart. I know exactly how you feel, Pastor Wimbley. It's why many of the clergy aren't in a hurry to lead Sunday services or teach Sunday school lessons. They feel like they're beating their heads against a brick wall. And I hate that word, that damn N word. I'm sure there's a special place in hell for the man that came up with that word. And that mindset we're battling is making it next to impossible to find young men who are appropriate for sharing the word of God. But we can't give up. We may be reaching more than we think. I've seen little ones abandon their parents to go sit in Ava's lap and hold her hand. Pastor Wimbley nods agreeingly. You're right. I know you're right. Pastor Cross checks the time. We need to get going. They'll bring they'll be bringing Ava lunch soon, and I need to be ready to visit Bryant. I'm hoping I'll find the right words to help him. Pastor Wimbley nods agreeingly to Pastor Cross, then he gently touches my hair and my face. He tenderly kisses me goodbye. Hope to see you again soon. I tell him with a warm, loving smile. You will. Pastor Cross lets Pastor Wimbley exit ahead of him. He pauses in the door to tell me, I will note your service to Pastor Wimbley, and I will note that you're not appropriate for providing service with the other young women. Your service to Pastor Wimbley alone is more than enough. Then he leaves. Abuela brings me lunch. Dr. Walker eats with us. I like him. His personality is very much like my granddad's, gentle and kind, thoughtful and patient. He has a tendency to be soft spoken, which makes you listen more intently. He's the first new person to the district that wasn't born here since before I was born. So some will be leery of him. Some will never accept him because he's not a white man, and he understands that clearly. The medications make me sleep for a couple of hours after lunch. Arguing outside my hospital room door wakes me up. The door is barely open a crack, and I distinctly hear my father yell, "No! I don't want any of you near my daughter." I recognize Mrs. Cross's voice. "Listen, I know you don't know us, and that's our fault. We've deliberately kept you at a distance, and we don't know Ava as well as we should. We are a broken, dysfunctional mess. I don't like my sons, but I love them. And I don't know what came over Bryant because he loves her. He's begging to be executed because he's sure he killed her. She's part of our family." "Just ask her if she'll see us," insists Mr. Cross. "If she says no, she doesn't want to see us, we'll leave." My dad reminds Mr. and Mrs. Cross angrily. "It's my decision. I'm her father. I don't need to ask her anything." I finally call out, "What's going on out there?" "Damn it!" exclaims my father, mad. "Ava," calls Mrs. Cross, "we're here to see you." "Dad, it's all right. Let them in." My dad steps in the door, blocking their path. "Are you sure about this?" I nod. "Yeah, Dad, it's fine. If it makes you feel better, you can stay in the room with us." My dad steps all the way into the room and opens the door for them. He makes an enter motion with his hand unhappily. Blake and Bronson rush in a- ahead of their parents, but stop shocked just a couple of feet away from my bed. Bronson's eyes are wide with shocked disbelief as he covers his open mouth with both his hands. Blake's eyes well over with tears. Mrs. Cross, being a woman, lets out a shocked sob. Mr. Cross's eyes well up, but he's got it under control. My dad sits on the love seat with an angry, frustrated plop. Bryant began losing his temper with me and slapping me around about 4 years ago. The slapping has slowly increased in frequency, but it's usually not full force. Usually the worst is my cheek is pink for a day. Yet over the past year, I've worn a bruise shaped handprint several times, occasionally accompanied by a split lip. But Bryant never actually beat me before, so his parents and brothers are shocked. Blake comes all the way to my hospital bed first. He takes my small hand and brings it to his lips. Then he holds it to his cheek with his eyes closed for a few moments. He tells me sincerely, "I am so sorry. I know Bryant's been troubled the last few years, but I didn't think asking him to step aside so I can marry you would send him over the edge." I tell Blake, "I don't think it was that." As Bronson goes around to the other side of my bed where he grabs the doctor's stool and sits on it next to my bed. I'm short, so there's plenty of room across the foot of my bed where Mr. and Mrs. Cross each sit on a corner. "Why would you do that?" Mrs. Cross asked Blake. "Because he's losing her," explains Blake. "I can see her family is upset with Blake and his unpredictable temper." "Lost," states my father. "He's lost her. He's never going to marry my daughter. None of you are. I'd marry her to Pastor Wimbley if it wouldn't leave her a young, beautiful widow and vulnerable all over again." Mr. Cross reminds Blake, "You're my oldest. You're slated to follow in my footsteps. I can't allow you to marry Ava anyway." Blake says to his father with narrowed, serious eyes, "Insurance policies," which puts a frustrated look on Mr. Cross's face. "Blake, I didn't know you were in love with Ava," states Mrs. Cross, surprised. Blake responds to her irritated. It's hard to know anything when your head is stuck inside a wine bottle. Mrs. Cross admits, You got me there. Blake tells his parents, annoyed, If either of you were paying any attention, you would have noticed Ava's the only woman I've been sleeping with for years. My father informs Blake's my father informs Blake firmly, I don't care how in love with her you are. You're not marrying her. Bronson inserts, I know Pastor Wimley loves Ava. I've seen him pat her bottom and steal kisses from her, but he's too old to get it up. I inform Bronson he's not too old to get it up. What? Asked Bronson, confused. I roll my eyes and inform Bronson Pastor Wimbley gets it up just fine. Bronson asks me, How do you know he can get it up? Mrs. Cross tells Bronson matter of factly, There's only one way for her to know. Are you trying to be funny? This isn't the time to be funny. I inform Mr. and Mrs. Cross he's not trying to be funny. He's never trying to be funny. He's your stupid one. Blake nods his agreement with me. If either of you were paying any attention, you might have figured out for yourselves that Bronson's the stupid one. But, says Mr. Cross, confused, his grades were always decent. Not good, but decent. He usually averaged a C. Blake informs his parents. Girls that like him have always helped him with his work and done it for him. He's never written his own essays or anything. I inform Mr. and Mrs. Cross. He has excellent recall. He remembers facts, figures, dates, and stuff. He knows the answer to 2 plus 2 is 4, but he doesn't necessarily understand why the answer is 4. I know why, inserts Bronson enthusiastically, then using his fingers, because if you have two things and you have two more, when you count them together, it's 4 things. See? My dad starts laughing. You don't even know which one of your kids is the stupid one. I inform them he's not trying to be funny. The stupid stuff that comes out of his mouth is what he's actually thinking. It's almost like a superpower he doesn't even know he has. He says something stupid, but it makes people laugh, so they think he's being funny on purpose. Wait, requests Bronson, confused. I thought Bryant was the stupid one. No, dear, I tell Bronson sweetly. Bryant's not stupid, but don't worry about it. You did an excellent job of explaining why 2 plus 2 equals 4. And I know he won't worry about it. He smiles winningly at me for telling him he did a great job and asks me, Can I have a kiss? I nod yes and give him a kiss. Then he rests his head on my lap. I pull my fingers through his hair and comment to Blake, Best puppy ever. Blake scruffs up Bronson's hair and says with a warm smile, Yeah, I like him. I like puppies, comments Bronson. Then he tells me, I love you, Ava. I have no responding. I love you too, Bronson. Blake asks me, Why is it easy for you to tell Bronson you love him, but you have trouble saying it to me and Bryant? I take a moment to think how to explain it. When you or Bryant tell me you love me, it's this intense, serious thing. I love you both, but not with the same intenseness or passion you have for me. And I don't want to tell you a lie. But when Bronson says it, it's childlike. It's not serious and passionate. So I have no trouble saying it back. Blake takes a deep breath. I think I understand. Mr. Cross asked me, So what happened after Blake and Bronson left you and Bryant alone? I take a deep breath and exhale heavily. I don't know. Parts of it are fuzzy, but there was no argument or anything like that. One minute we were laying together cozily, just talking, and the next he was strangling me with his bare hands as he went on about setting me free. When I hit him with the root beer bottle, the first time it wasn't hard enough to knock him out, and I think I just made him mad. He kicked me repeatedly, He made a fist and pulled back, but I don't remember the blow. I definitely saw stars. Then he was sitting on me, strangling me again. The next time I hit him with the root beer bottle, I gave it everything I had and knocked him out. Still, there are injuries. I'm not sure where they came from, whether they came from Bryant or when I fell down the front staircase. You fell down the front staircase, states Mrs. Cross with a gasp. I nod. I tripped and I lost my balance, tumbled all the way to the bottom. You must have been terrified, says Mrs. Cross. I nod agreeingly. I was terrified. Blake asks me, can you make some room for me so I can hold you? I nod and scoot over so Blake can slide onto the bed with me and hold me. It feels good to be held, and I don't mind the slow, thorough kiss either. Mr. Cross slides off his corner of my hospital bed and joins my father on the love seat. He tells my father, we're overdue for a proper conversation with one another. My dad responds, that's true. Ava, Mrs. Cross says my name softly. I'm sorry we failed to get to know you properly. We don't know you half as well as you know us, and we've not tried to get to know your family at all. I shrug. They feel they know more about you. They feel they know more about all of you than they would like to anyway. After all, we're our district's doctors. We know everyone and all their dirty little secrets. Who cheats on her husband, who's secretly homosexual or bisexual. And just so you know, your pool boy's bisexual. I point to her and I point at Bronson's head on my lap because they both screw the pool boy. Oh dear God, exclaims Mrs. Cross. I really need to sober up so I know what's going on around me. So, is Bronson bi? I shake my head. He's not truly interested in men like that. He's not seeking them out for sex like he does women. But he's very opportunistic when it comes to sex. So when the pool boy offers to blow him or be done anally, Bronson just goes with it. Just thought you might like to know where the mouth of the pool boy has sometimes been just before you've kissed him. Mrs. Cross states, looking a little green. I think I'm going to be sick. Then she rushes into the bathroom and shuts the door. Blake and I tune out her retching to listen to our father's talk. There's no telling how much Bronson is absorbing until he says something that indicates he heard every word that was said. My father informs Mr. Cross, we're not pressing charges. We just want Bryant to get the help he needs. We love him. We don't know Blake or Bronson as well. They've only visited us with Bryant occasionally. But Bryant used to spend time with us regularly. He really took us putting off the wedding until he's finished with his studies the wrong way. Stop spending time with us and taking Ava to your home all the time. We understand his learning disability and the pressure he's under. We didn't want to add to that pressure by letting them get married, and then he would be coping with working part time, school part time, and a family of his own full time. I know he wants Ava to have his baby, and Ava would do it for him if I let her, but I know he's not ready for that. He doesn't want Ava to work because he selfishly wants to keep her all to himself. But Ava needs to work, and the hospital, clinic, and urgent care need her. People like her who want to serve by taking care of others are becoming hard to come by. Being a doctor may allow you to live a comfortable life, but it doesn't make you rich and powerful. Mr. Cross questions. My boys must have spent time with your family. My Mr. Cross questions. My boys have spent time with your family? My dad nods. Yes, but mostly just Bryant. About 2 weeks after kindergarten began, he showed up at our front door. I asked him if he was lost, and he asked me if Ava Washington lived there. I answered yes, and he told me, then I'm not lost. Walked on in, calling for Ava, who excitedly came running. Gave him a big hug, got his hand and started showing him around the house and introduced him to everyone. I called your home and spoke to your wife. She didn't even know he was missing. She thought he was playing in his room. I didn't know that, admits Mr. Cross. Mrs. Cross has come out of the bathroom. She still looks pale as she sits in the recliner nearest the love seat, and she informs her husband, I didn't tell you back then because I was afraid you'd get mad. A cross boy befriending and playing with the only child of color in our small town? But she was the only friend he had. The other children wouldn't have anything to do with him. They picked on and bullied both of them. They sat together because no one else would sit with them. The teacher didn't want to waste her time with him because, as she told me, there were children with real potential she needed to focus on. Ava helped him with his schoolwork and tied his shoes when they came untied. She played with him when other children wouldn't. I let him go to Ava's after school for over a month before he finally mentioned her in front of you. I was terrified you were going to forbid him from having anything to do with her. Why would I do that? Asked Mr. Cross. She was a beautiful, intelligent, friendly, kind child. Bryant adored her and she adored him. Because she's part black, answers Mrs. Cross frankly. And you're a cross, and crosses are related to drumps. And drumps aren't fond of people of color, but they're especially not fond of blacks and Mexicans. And she's part black and Mexican. Two strikes. Mr. Cross nods his understanding. I see why you thought that. But just because crosses are related to drumps doesn't mean we think like them. In public, I let it look like I don't disagree with the drumps. But you've never actually heard me say I do agree with them. Yet, I can't openly say I don't agree either. Drump Sr. had one of his own grandsons executed for being openly gay. My grandmother, being Drump Jr.'s older sister, isn't going to protect us. Are you two aren't a couple who talks much, are you? Asked my father. Very true, admits Mr. Cross. You and your wife married each other because you're in love. Yes, of course, answers my father matter of factly. I think that's wonderful, says Mr. Cross sincerely. I had hoped for that when I was a young man, and I hope for loving marriages for my sons. But Lilith and I are not married for love. I know the rumor is that she seduced me, and she may have believed that herself at one time. She married me because I'm from a rich, powerful family, and she believed that would provide her with a lavish, opulent, cushy life. Yet she long ago discovered that it isn't half as easy as less fortunate people think it is, and she drinks a lot of wine to cope. I married her because I was expected to marry and have a family, carry on the Cross name and such. I needed a wife who was reasonably pretty, reasonably intelligent, photographed well, and would look good on my arm during formal functions. Lilith checked all the boxes, so I married her. We don't talk more than necessary, and usually only when it's necessary. She's given me 3 sons I love very much, and I love her for that, if for nothing else. Her tubes were tied after Bryant was born, and she is now free to have discreet affairs, as I have my discreet affairs. Once in a while, we still bone each other. My father shakes his head. That's just sad. Mr. Cross nods agreeingly. Indeed it is. The one bright spot in our miserable lives is your daughter. That big that big house on the hill is cold and lonely when she's not there. Without her, we all go to our neutral corners and only interact when necessary. With her, we come together and interact almost like a real family. And I understand Bryant has become too unstable to marry her, but Blake is stable and more in love with her than I was aware of before today. He loves her enough to blackmail me to let him marry her. Until today, I just thought she was his favorite sex toy and favorite way to annoy Bryant. Well, I just learned yesterday that Bryant's been stuck sharing her for years with his older brothers, shares my father unhappily. Quite frankly, I'm shocked and appalled that this has been going on in your home. It certainly hasn't been good for Bryant's mental health, and I don't like the effect it's had on Ava. She's become distant and quiet over the years. She was a happy, sing-songy child. Here she's been protecting us from knowing what she's been going through in your home, protecting us from suffering with her because there really isn't anything we can do to stop it. All we could do was get her an implant as soon as she went through puberty to protect her from an unwanted pregnancy because we knew someone would take advantage of her first chance he got, and she would be entered into the service rotations for the pastors when she turned 16. We were grateful when we discovered how much being Bryant's girlfriend and later his fiancée protected her, kept her out of the rotation for the pastors and such. Except he couldn't protect her from his own brothers. I can't imagine how much that has eaten at him. But I understand why he was pushing so hard to marry her sooner rather than later. Yes, it's been a bone of contention between them, admits Mr. Cross. He wanted it to stop, but with Blake being in love with her too, it wasn't going to stop. And Bronson is practically Blake's shadow. The women Blake rejects turn to Bronson with open legs as a backup plan. But I want you to seriously consider allowing Ava to marry Blake instead of Bryant. My father shakes his head. That would put her under the same roof as Bryant. Next time he may succeed at setting her free. I can't risk her life like that. Blake suggests, what if I relocate to your home instead of Ava relocating to ours? I want Ava to be safe just as much as you do. What about that? Asked Mr. Cross. Will you consider allowing Blake to marry Ava if he relocates to your home instead of she to ours? I will consider it, agrees my father. But I need to inform you we think we found a suitable husband for Ava. I knew it, states Blake, frustrated. I should have made my move months ago. Is he someone from our district? Asks Mrs. Cross, concerned. My father shakes his head. No, he's from another district. Are you sure about this? Asks Mr. Cross. Do you really want to send her to a stranger in another district? No, admits my father, but I do want her to be safe from Bryant. We love Bryant, and we've greatly missed his presence in our household the last few years. But we have to do what's best for Ava. We have to protect her. We've been searching for over a year, and we believe we finally found someone. I'll still consider the marriage to Blake, but I need to discuss it with her mother and grandparents. It's their home too, and I ask that you seriously consider what is right for Bryant. He's not like Blake and Bronson. I know he's been working part time at the municipal building, and he hates it. Why not let him work part time in his maternal grandfather's garage instead? He's a good mechanic. It would be good for his self esteem. Consider letting him drop out of the university, or at least let him study what he's interested in. He hates political science and law. For the love of God, man, stop worrying so much about what's right for the Cross name and do what's right for your son. Mr. Cross nods agreeingly. I guess in many ways Lilith and I are failing miserably as parents when it comes to Bryant. Not just when it comes to Bryant, my dad points out. For all three of them. You didn't know your dumb one. You didn't know who your dumb one is. You've been torturing Bryant with his weaknesses instead of building on his strengths, holding him to unrealistic expectations, and you fail to recognize your oldest child is in love. And I'm supposed to let my daughter, my baby girl, our only child, marry into this mess you call a family? I'll seriously consider Blake's proposal, but I'm going to do what's best for my daughter, and I hope you're going to start doing what's best for your sons. From out of nowhere, Bronson asked me, Ava, did you have sex with Pastor Wembley? I answer a little amused, yes, Bronson, I have. I service him at least once a month. But that's gross, states Bronson. How's it gross? I ask, curious. It's gross old man sex, answers Bronson. He's old. People shouldn't have Old people shouldn't have sex. It's gross. Just ew. I shake my head and tell him, you won't think it's so gross when you're an old man. But I'm not an old man, responds Bronson. I inform Bronson, if you're lucky enough to live as long as Pastor Wembley, you'll become an old man. It has something to do with your age? Asked Bronson. Yes, I confirm for him. It has everything to do with your age. If I don't celebrate my birthdays, will that stop it? Asked Bronson. No, I tell Bronson. Even if you don't celebrate them, you'll still get 1 year older every year. Is there any way to stop it from happening? Asks Bronson. I tell him, nope. It happens slowly. For the most part, you won't even realize it's happening. You just wake up one day, look in the mirror, and your outside no longer matches your inside. But it's not a bad thing. I don't dare tell him if he dies young, he won't grow old. It's not a bad thing? Questions Bronson. No, I assure him. It's not a bad thing. It's perfectly natural. All right, then, responds Bronson agreeably. If it's not a bad thing, I guess I can do it. Can I have another kiss? I take his face in my small hands and kiss him. He can tie his shoes, read and write, walk and talk, and for the most part he seems perfectly normal. He's even housebroken. But if you spend enough time with Bronson, you would come to recognize that there's just some part of him that's stuck as a